Dean Martin delivered the punchline to his joke. The same second a bar stool crashed to the floor in the left corner, and a heavy-set man in a dark suit stood up fast, his jacket swinging open to reveal a metallic flash at his waistband. Notice, Dean's eyes locked on that flash, and his smile froze on his face, because nobody else in that room had seen it yet. Not the orchestra, not the security, not the 300 people still laughing at his joke. And Dean's next word would either stop what was about to happen, or let it explode into something nobody could take back. The showroom at the Sands was packed tight that Saturday night, April 1965. White tablecloths, reflecting the amber glow of stage lights like pools of liquid gold. Cigarette smoke, hanging in layers under the crystal chandeliers that cast fractured rainbows across the ceiling. And the air smelled like aged scotch and French perfume. And the electric buzz of people having the kind of night they'd talk about for years. The kind of night where everything felt possible, and the world outside the velvet curtains didn't exist. Dean was halfway through his set, riding the laughter like a surfer on a wave. Voice smooth as silk poured over ice, timing so perfect it felt like breathing, and the crowd was with him. 300 people leaning forward in their seats with that hungry lean that meant they were ready for anything, ready for the next joke, the next song, the next moment that would make them feel alive. Then the crash happened. It came from the back left corner, near the service entrance where the lighting was dimmer and the shadows pooled thick between tables, where the tables were crammed closer together, and the staff used it as a shortcut to the kitchen. Dean heard it over the laughter, a sharp, violent crack of wood, hitting hardwood that cut through the music like a gunshot, and his eyes flicked that direction on pure instinct. The same instinct that had kept him alive in clubs, where the mob ran the back rooms, and violence was always one wrong word away. The bar stool was on its side, legs pointing up like a dead animal. The man was standing, shoulders squared, face red and mottled with rage, jaw so tight, Dean could see the muscles jumping in his cheek even from 30 feet away, and his right hand was moving toward his waist, in a motion Dean had seen before, too many times, in too many dark rooms. That's when Dean saw it, metal, chrome, catching the stage lights in a hard bright flash, tucked into his belt, half hidden by his jacket, but unmistakable once you knew what you were looking at. A gun. Dean's throat went dry. His mouth tasted like copper. His hand tightened on the microphone so hard, his knuckles went white. But he kept his face smooth, kept that easy smile locked in place, even though every muscle in his body wanted to tense up and scream a warning. The laughter in the room was still going, rolling through the crowd like a wave crashing on a beach, people throwing their heads back and clapping, completely oblivious to what was happening 30 feet behind them. Nobody had noticed. The man at the table across from the standing guy looked absolutely terrified. Young kid, maybe 25 at most. Skinny as a rail with dark hair slicked back and sweat pouring down his temples. Eyes wide and white like a cornered animal. Hands up in front of his chest, in that universal gesture of surrender. Fingers trembling so hard, Dean could see it from the stage. The people at the tables nearby were still watching Dean, still smiling, still waiting for the next line, faces bright with expectation and alcohol. Dean's brain moved faster than it ever had. He could keep going, finish the joke. Let security handle it when they noticed. That was the smart move. That was the safe move. But the man's hand was on his waistband now, fingers curling around something, and Dean knew with absolute certainty that if he said one more word of his joke, someone in this room was going to get hurt. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from, and what time is it right now? Dean stepped forward on the stage, smile still frozen in place, and said in his smoothest, most casual voice, "Hold on, folks, hold that thought." The laughter died. The room went quiet. Every face turned to look at him, confused, and Dean could see the question in their eyes. What's happening? He kept his voice light, kept his body language relaxed, and said, We got a little situation in the back there. Nothing serious, but I'm gonna need everyone to stay in their seats for just a minute." The man in the dark suit froze. His hand stopped moving. His eyes snapped to Dean. And for one terrible second, Dean thought he'd made it worse. Thought the guy would panic, pull whatever he had, start something Dean couldn't stop. But then the man's face changed. The rage flickered. Uncertainty crept in. And Dean saw it, that split-second hesitation, and knew he had an opening. "Sir," Dean said, looking directly at the man, voice still calm, still smooth, like they were old friends having a casual conversation over drinks, instead of staring each other down across a crowded room with a loaded weapon between them. "In the corner. Yeah, you. I can see you back there. I'm gonna need you to sit back down." The room was silent now. The kind of silence that feels like pressure in your ears, like being underwater. 300 people, holding their breath at exactly the same time. The orchestra had stopped playing. You could hear ice shifting in glasses. You could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. You could hear every heartbeat. The man stared at Dean, and Dean stared back, and the space between them felt like a wire pulled so tight it might snap and cut someone in half. His hand was still on his waistband, fingers wrapped around something Dean couldn't quite see but knew was there. The young kid at the table looked like he was about to faint, all the color drained from his face, breathing in short, quick gasps. Somewhere near the stage, Dean heard the faint crackle of a walkie-talkie as security started moving, slow and careful, trying not to spook the situation into something worse. "Come on now," Dean said. "Softer. Let's not do this. Not here. Not tonight." The man's jaw worked. His fingers twitched. Then slowly, like he was moving through water, he let his hand drop to his side. He didn't sit down, but he stepped back from the table. Just one step, but it was enough. Dean exhaled, slow and controlled, and said to the room, "There we go. Crisis averted. Everybody okay?" A few nervous laughs. A few murmurs. The tension started to bleed out of the air, but Dean could still feel it, tight and coiled, ready to snap back if he said the wrong thing. He looked at the bandleader and gave a tiny nod. "Keep going." The orchestra started playing, soft and low, filling the silence with something that wasn't words, and Dean turned his attention back to the man in the corner. Security was moving now. Two guys in dark suits, sliding through the crowd toward the back corner, and Dean kept talking, kept the room's attention on him so they wouldn't notice. "You know, folks, I've been doing this a long time, and let me tell you, you see all kinds of things from up here. People propose, people break up. One time a guy fell asleep in his soup. Laughter rippled through the crowd, tentative at first, then stronger." Dean smiled, but his eyes never left the corner. The security guys reached the man. One of them put a hand on his shoulder, quiet and professional, and said something Dean couldn't hear. The man looked at them, looked at Dean, and then finally sat down, heavily, like all the air had gone out of him. The security guy leaned in close, talking low, and the man nodded. Then they walked him out, calm and quiet, through the service exit, and just like that, he was gone. Dean watched the door close. The young kid at the table was still sitting there, shaking, and a woman next to him, probably his girlfriend, had her arm around his shoulders. Dean caught the kid's eye and gave him a small nod. "You're okay." The kid nodded back, barely. The room was still quiet, still waiting, and Dean knew he had to bring them back, had to turn this into something they could laugh about, something that wouldn't ruin the night. He turned to the crowd and said, "So, where were we?" Someone in the front row said, "You were telling a joke." "Was I?" Dean said, grinning. "Must have been a good one. I forgot the punchline." The room erupted. Laughter, loud and relieved, and applause rolled through the showroom like a thunderstorm. Dean let it wash over him, let the tension break and scatter, and then he picked up where he'd left off. different joke, lighter tone. The show went on, but Dean's hands were shaking when he lifted the microphone. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He'd just talked a man with a gun into standing down in front of 300 people, and nobody in this room except the kid and the security guys knew how close it had come to going the other way. Look, here's what you need to understand about moments like that. The difference between a joke and a tragedy is about 3 seconds and one wrong word. Dean had been on stages for 20 years. He knew how to read a room. He knew when someone was drunk, when someone was angry, when someone was about to snap, and he'd seen that look in the man's eyes, that red-hot mix of rage and desperation, and he'd known instantly that if he kept joking, if he kept the crowd laughing, the guy would feel cornered, humiliated, and he'd do something stupid. So Dean had stopped, and it had worked. This time, Dean finished the song, cracked a few more jokes, and moved into the next number. The crowd warmed back up, laughter and applause flowing easy now. And by the time Dean took his bow 20 minutes later, you'd never know anything had happened. But when he walked off stage, his legs felt weak. His shirt was soaked with sweat under his tuxedo jacket. He went straight to his dressing room, closed the door, and sat down hard on the couch. There was a knock. Dean said, "Come in." The head of security stepped inside. A tall, weathered guy named Frank, with steel gray haircut, military short, and a white scar over his left eyebrow that he'd gotten in Korea, the kind of guy who'd seen enough violence to recognize it before it happened. He closed the door behind him with a soft click and said, "That was good work out there, Dean. Real good work. I've been doing this 20 years, and I've never seen anyone talk down an armed drunk that smoothly." Dean poured himself a drink from the bottle on the side table, hands shaking so bad the neck of the bottle rattled against the glass. Scotch. Single malt. He didn't even taste it. "What'd you find?" "Gun," Frank said, and the word hung in the air like smoke. .38 revolver, snub nose, loaded, 6 rounds. He had it tucked in his belt right where you saw it. No holster, no safety. One wrong move, and it could have gone off accidentally. Never mind if he'd actually pulled it. Dean's stomach dropped straight through the floor. He set the glass down before he dropped it. "Jesus Christ." "Yeah," Frank said quietly. "The kid at the table owed him money. 5 grand. Gambling debt from a poker game last month. The guy came here tonight specifically to collect. Told his buddies he wasn't leaving without cash or blood. In the middle of my show," Frank shrugged. He was drunk, angry, bad combination. Dean downed the scotch in one swallow. "Is the kid okay?" "Yeah. Shaken up, but okay. We got his statement, and we called Metro. They're taking the guy in." "Good," Dean said. Then quieter, "Good." Frank looked at him for a second, and then he said, "How'd you see it?" "The gun. Nobody else caught it." Dean set the glass down and rubbed his face with both hands. "I don't know. I saw the bar stool fall, and I looked over, and there it was. Metal catches the light, you know, even from across the room." "You saved that kid's life," Frank said. Dean didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Frank left. Dean sat alone in the dressing room, staring at the mirror. His reflection looked tired, older than it should. He thought about the man with the gun, about how close he'd been to pulling it, and about the kid at the table who had no idea how lucky he was. Wait. Before you start thinking Dean was some kind of hero, you need to know something. This wasn't the first time he'd seen a gun in a crowd. It wasn't even the second. Vegas in the 60s was a different world. The mob ran half the casinos. People settled debts with violence. And performers learned real fast how to spot trouble and diffuse it before it turned into a headline. Dean had talked down angry drunks. He'd stepped between fights. He'd seen knives, brass knuckles, broken bottles. He'd learned that the best way to stop violence was to acknowledge it without escalating it. Stay calm, Stay smooth. Make the guy feel seen without making him feel cornered. It didn't always work, but tonight it had. Dean changed out of his tuxedo, pulling on slacks and a simple white shirt, and walked out to the main floor. The showroom was clearing out now, people filing toward the exits, still talking and laughing, and nobody seemed rattled. Good, that's what Dean wanted. He didn't want this to be the night people remembered for the wrong reasons. He found the kid sitting at the bar alone, hunched over like he was trying to disappear into himself, nursing a beer that looked untouched, condensation running down the glass in slow rivers. The girlfriend was gone, probably scared off by what had almost happened. The kid's hands were shaking so bad the beer sloshed when he lifted it. He looked up when Dean approached, and his face went white as paper, eyes going wide with something that looked like terror and gratitude mixed together in equal measure. "Mr. Martin, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for. I never wanted." "Relax," Dean said, sliding onto the stool next to him, feeling the cool leather under his slacks, hearing it creak. "You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't bring that guy here. You didn't put a gun in his hand." "I owe him money," the kid said, and his voice was shaking almost as bad as his hands, words tumbling out like he'd been holding them in for hours, and they were burning a hole in his chest. $5,000. I thought I could win it back at the tables. You know, I had a system. I was so sure, but I kept losing, and I kept doubling down. And then he said, if I didn't pay tonight, he was gonna—" The kid's voice broke. He put his hand over his mouth and turned away, shoulders shaking. "How old are you?" Dean asked, voice gentle but firm. 26, the kid said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, leaving a wet streak across his cheek. "You got a job?" "Yeah. I'm a mechanic. Over in Henderson Auto Repair, on Boulder Highway. I'm good at it too. I can fix anything. But the pay, it's not enough to cover what I owe. Not fast enough. And I thought, if I could just get ahead, just once." Dean nodded slowly, seeing himself in this kid's desperate hope, remembering nights when he'd been young and stupid, and thought he could beat the house if he just tried hard enough. "Here's what you're gonna do, and you're gonna listen to me real careful. You're gonna stop gambling. Tonight, right this second. You're done. You never set foot in another casino. You never sit down at another poker table. You never put another quarter in a slot machine. You understand me?" The kid looked at him, eyes red and wet. "I can't. I owe." "I don't care what you owe," Dean said. And there was steel in his voice now. The kind of steel that came from watching too many people destroy themselves, chasing money they'd never catch. "You keep gambling, you're gonna end up dead or in the desert with a bullet in your head. That man tonight, he was ready to kill you. You saw his eyes. I saw his eyes. And he will come back if you don't get out. You understand what I'm telling you?" The kid swallowed hard and nodded. "Good," Dean said. He pulled out his wallet, soft brown leather worn smooth from years in his pocket, and took out $500 bills, crisp and new, and set them on the bar in a neat stack between them. "This is a loan, not a gift, a loan. You're gonna take this money. You're gonna put it toward your debt today, tomorrow morning at the latest, and you're gonna work out a payment plan for the rest with whoever holds your markers. And if I ever hear you step foot in a casino again, if I hear you put even $5 on a horse race, I'm gonna come find you myself, and we're gonna have a very different conversation. We clear?" The kid stared at the money like it was a mirage that might disappear if he blinked. His mouth opened and closed. His hand hovered over the bills but didn't touch them, like he was afraid they'd burn him. "I can't take this, Mr. Martin. This is too much. I don't deserve." "You can and you will," Dean said. And his voice was firm but not unkind. The voice of someone who'd been where this kid was, and knew the only way out was through. "Because if you don't, that guy's gonna come back. And next time, I won't be there to stop him. Next time, You'll be in a parking lot somewhere with nobody watching, and it'll be too late. So you take this money, and you use it to buy yourself time, and you use that time to fix your life. You got one chance here. Don't waste it." The kid's hand shook as he picked up the bills. "I'll pay you back. I swear." "I know you will," Dean said. He stood up, patted the kid on the shoulder, and walked away. He didn't expect to see that money again. That wasn't the point. The point was that the kid was alive. And maybe, just maybe, he'd learn something from tonight. Maybe he'd stop digging himself deeper. Maybe he'd turn his life around. Or maybe he'd be back at the tables next week, chasing the same losing streak. Dean didn't know. He couldn't control that. All he could do was give the kid a chance. Dean walked out of the sands into the cool desert night, air sharp and clean, after the smoke-thick atmosphere of the casino, temperature dropping fast the way it always did in the desert after sunset. The strip was alive with neon, colors flashing and buzzing in the dark, like electric flowers blooming in concrete, reds and blues and greens and golds, painting the sidewalks in shifting patterns, slot machines ringing through open casino doors in an endless mechanical symphony, laughter and music spilling out of every entrance, mixing with car engines and distant sirens. Dean got in his car, a black Cadillac with white leather seats that still smelled new, and sat there for a long minute, hands on the steering wheel, engine off, staring at nothing in particular, just trying to let his heart rate come down, trying to stop seeing that flash of chrome in his mind every time he closed his eyes. His phone rang. He picked it up. "Yeah, Dean. It's Morty." His manager voiced tight with worry. "I heard what happened tonight." "Jesus, Dean. Security said you talked a guy with a gun into backing down. In the middle of your set. In front of 300 people. Are you out of your mind?" "I'm fine, Morty." "Fine? You could have been shot. He could have shot someone in the audience. This could have been a massacre, and you stopped the show to talk to him. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking if I kept singing, he'd feel trapped, cornered, and he'd pull that gun, and someone would die," Dean said quietly. "So yeah, I stopped the show." Morty was quiet for a second, and Dean could hear him breathing hard on the other end of the line. Then he said, "You're either the bravest guy I know or the dumbest." Dean laughed, short and bitter, no humor in it. "Little bit of both, probably. The Sands is talking about giving you a bonus, hazard pay, or something. They want to keep you happy, so you don't walk away from your contract over this." "I don't want it," Dean said. "Dean, I don't want it, Morty. Tell them to give it to the kid, the one who owed the money. He needs it more than I do." Morty sighed. "You know that's not how it works." "Then make it work," Dean said, and hung up. He started the car, engine purring to life smooth and quiet, and drove home through the empty streets, Las Vegas Boulevard, giving way to quiet residential areas where the houses sat dark, the lights fading behind him as he climbed into the hills where the air was cleaner and thinner. He thought about the man with the gun, about the rage in his eyes, about how easy it would have been for everything to go wrong. Remember this. Violence doesn't announce itself with trumpets and drums. It starts quiet. A bar stool falling. A man standing. A hand moving toward a waist. And if you're not paying attention, if you're too focused on the joke, or the song, or the applause, you miss it, and then people get hurt. Dean had been paying attention. He'd seen it, and he'd stopped it. But it had cost him something. Every time he stepped on that stage now, he'd be scanning the crowd, looking for the next flash of metal, the next angry face, the next moment where everything could go wrong. That was the price of awareness. You couldn't unsee things. You couldn't unknow danger. When Dean got home, he poured himself another drink and sat in the dark living room, looking out at the lights of Vegas spread below him like a glittering blanket. He thought about the kid at the bar, clutching those $500 bills like a lifeline. He thought about the man with the gun, sitting in a holding cell somewhere, sobering up, and realizing what he'd almost done. He thought about the 300 people in that showroom who'd gone home, thinking they'd just seen a regular Dean Martin show, never knowing how close they'd come to witnessing something terrible. Notice this: most acts of courage don't look like courage. They look like a guy making a joke at the wrong time. They look like someone stepping forward when everyone else is stepping back. They look quiet and small and unremarkable, until you realize what didn't happen because someone chose to act. Dean finished his drink and went to bed. He didn't sleep well. He kept seeing the flash of metal, kept hearing the crash of the bar stool, kept replaying that moment when the man's hand stopped moving, and Dean knew he'd gotten through. 3 seconds, one wrong word. That's all it had been. The next night, Dean was back on stage at the Sands. Same showroom, same lights, same songs. But when he scanned the crowd during his opening number, his eyes lingered on the back corners, on the faces that looked too angry, too drunk, too desperate. He didn't see any guns, but he was looking. He'd always be looking now. Halfway through the set, a man stood up at a table near the left wall. Dean's heart jumped. His hand tightened on the microphone, but the man was just going to the bathroom, weaving slightly, drunk but harmless. Dean let out a breath. He didn't know he'd been holding, and kept singing. After the show, Frank found him backstage. Heard from Metro, the guy with the gun is being charged. Assault with a deadly weapon, public endangerment. He's looking at 5 to 10. And the kid? Dean asked. Kid's fine. Paid off part of his debt already. Said he's quitting the tables. Dean nodded. Good. He asked me to give you this, Frank said, handing Dean an envelope. Dean opened it. Inside was a check for $200 and a handwritten note in shaky blue ink. I'll pay the rest back as soon as I can. Thank you for saving my life, Tommy. Dean folded the note and put it in his pocket. He didn't cash the check. He kept it in his wallet for years. A reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures mattered more than the grand ones. That Saturday became a story Dean never told publicly. The Sands didn't publicize it. The papers didn't pick it up. The 300 people in the audience that night went home thinking Dean had handled some minor disturbance. Nothing serious. Only a handful of people knew what had really happened, and they kept quiet. But Dean knew, and every time he stepped on that stage, every time he scanned the crowd and saw nothing but happy faces, he felt a tiny bit of relief, because he knew how fast things could turn, how thin the line was between a great night and a tragedy, and he knew he'd walk that line every single time he performed, for the rest of his career. If you want to hear what really happened the night someone in the audience threw something at Dean and he had to make a choice that changed the rest of the show, tell me in the comments.